What he did not mention is perhaps the most important. I'm a friend of Eduardo Pisani. I do hope my voice holds up, because until a couple of days ago, I was completely aphonic. But ladies and gentlemen, first, let me thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you at your important annual dinner. I've been asked in 20 minutes to reflect on 3 areas that might be of current interest. Each one of them would merit a formal lecture, but I'll be brief and highlight only the points needed for the arguments that link them. I'll refer to the global health challenges, the need for collaboration and partnerships in addressing them, and the link between these and the innovation, which is the main theme of your meeting. The standard approach to defining the global health challenges is to use some formulation of Abdel Omran's epidemiological transition, or what is known as the health transition, and to show that the progression is inevitably from famine and pestilence through the stage of the receding pandemics to the predominance of the chronic degenerative diseases globally. It is these last that have occupied most of my attention recently. It is my last passion. And the major 4 are heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and chronic respiratory disease. And there's clear evidence that they represent an ever-growing challenge globally. The data are impressive. These 4 are responsible for about 2/3 of all global deaths, the great majority of which occur in low and middle-income countries. And it is a myth that they affect only the elderly, as about 1/4 of these deaths occur in persons below the age of 60. And the economists tell us that in the next 2 decades, they will cost the world about $30 trillion. And if mental health is added, the figure is about $49 trillion. I was one of the first to use the expression tsunami to describe them some 5 years ago when I spoke in Alexandria in Egypt. I did it in order to paint the image of an impending disaster of almost apocalyptic dimensions. But I'll take a different approach. I'll take a different approach this evening, and I'll frame these problems in a personal context. Because I'm old enough to appreciate the manner in which the challenges to global health have changed. There have been massive changes, not only in the basic health problems, but also in how we have addressed them. When I was born in Barbados 80 years ago, the infant mortality in my country was about 300 deaths per 1,000. So I had a 1 in 3 chances of seeing my first birthday. And this was the situation throughout most of the poor world, in which famine and pestilence indeed made life for many nasty, brutish, and short. But I survived, and I went to medical school in Jamaica, and I learned about the diseases that were common in the poor countries. I saw leeches applied to suppurating wounds. I learned to herald the crisis and the lysis of fever as signs of recovering from typhoid. And I could describe in detail the manifestations of yaws. And I witnessed a euphoria that attended the early use of penicillin and the hubristic enthusiasm that at last man had got the better of the germs. Myocardial infarcts were a rarity, and when they did occur, were almost fatal. But in my lifetime, I have seen the infections recede, and I have seen the chronic diseases take their place. Now in my country, Barbados, but 1 in 7 adults is diabetic, and Barbados has garnered the reputation of the amputation capital of the world because in the last 6 years, 1,000 people had below-knee amputations, a population of 280,000. 1,000 amputations. There have also been changes in the manner in which we have addressed the changing pattern of disease. There have been epidemiological as well as political changes. And we have passed from the stage in which the nation states accepting their pristine responsibility to protect their citizens within their territorial boundary and ever conscious of the need to preserve trade and commerce, they depended on quarantine to keep the pestilence out. And this passed to the stage in which they were concerned with addressing disease at its point of origin. And now we are accepting that for self-interest, as well as for laudable humanitarian reasons, the nation states must address diseases collectively. However, such is the nature of national sovereignty that while the borders of our nations are permeable to the vectors of disease, principal among them being information, or if you like, propaganda, that comes often unbidden and unregulated at all people, the site of corrective action is national. This interconnectedness, that is the essence of globalization, is for me the first major challenge in global health. How do we address on a global scale the problems that affect all the world's people and still preserve national agency? How do we build a bridge between the knowledge of the global dimension of disease and the capacity of the nation state to respond? How can we achieve global action to address those diseases that are really impatient of national confinement? The solution is essentially a political one, and the world has agreed to create structures in which the global consensus can be reached on the manner in which these problems can be tackled. The obvious one is the World Health Organization, one of whose underappreciated major functions is to provide a forum for socializing governments into collective action. But it has become clear that some of these problems have such political ramifications outside of health that they need to be addressed in a global political forum. Thus, we find that health is entering the global political arena. Perhaps the first health problem to attract such attention was HIV/AIDS, because of the infectious nature of disease, and also because it represented what I describe as a toxic cocktail of sex, blood, and death, and was also the focus of health activism on an unprecedented scale. Thus, we saw HIV being addressed at the level of the Security Council, and it was the first health issue to come before a special session of the United Nations General Assembly. It is noteworthy, and perhaps an indication of the health transition, that the second set of health problems to be addressed at this level was the 4 main non-communicable diseases. This progression is important, as the declarations from this level indicate quite clearly that these problems have to be addressed at the level of the state and not only at the level of the government. There has to be involvement of the private sector. There has to be involvement of civil society. And this recognition of the pluralist approach to addressing health problems is an important aspect of the new challenge. The political declaration on NCDs from the UN General Assembly sets out a number of commitments for all parts of society. It emphasizes personal behavior as fundamental for primary prevention, but we know that this will not be sufficient, and there has to be a change in the enabling environment which is within the purview of government. But importantly for this audience, it spelled out the role of the private sector and industry. It spelled out the role of the private sector and industry as important supporters of national effort to control these diseases. It calls specifically on the private sector, and I quote textually, it calls on the private sector to contribute to efforts to improve access to and affordability of medicines and technologies in the prevention and control of NCDs. I won't describe in detail the approaches to be taken in dealing with these diseases, but I wish to emphasize 2 common risk factors, which for me perhaps present the gravest challenge of all. I refer first to tobacco use, which is associated with a plethora of diseases and not only NCDs. I fear tobacco because of the powerful financial interest behind it and the capacity for those interests to corrupt our social systems. But I fear obesity as much or more. I can envision a world in which our technologies control or prevent many of the diseases that are upon us now or are likely to come. But I have to confess a deep angst over the tendency of the world to get fatter and fatter, and to be comfortable with the notion that our appetites increase with eating. As distinct from tobacco, there is no single identifiable enemy. There are many enemies, and they come in many guises. As Ilona Kickbush put it succinctly, obesity will be the test case for the 21st century public health. as was the introduction of water and sewage at the end of the 19th century. For the kind of care needed for these, and indeed for all chronic conditions, there must be partnership between the individual, the community, and the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of institutional care. There must be partnerships among the various sectors and agencies of government. And while the health sector is the one to which the public looks for health and health care, the healthy state depends always on the inputs from other sectors of government. But equally important is the partnership among the parts of the state. The partnership of the various parts of the state I prefer to call intersectoral partnership or cooperation, as opposed to the partnerships within government agencies, which I prefer to label multi-sectoral cooperation or multi-sectoral partnership. For me, that is not epistemological jousting. I think it is an important distinction that within governments, I refer to as multi-sectoral cooperation, and within the various parts of the state, government, public sector, civil society, I think that is intersectoral cooperation, because the rules of engagement are fundamentally different. In the case of the intersectoral partnership, in which the private sector is involved, there are usually more formal contractual arrangements. And the principal agent type of arrangement which obtains between government and civil society is not appropriate for the contractual arrangements between government and the private sector. The role of government is obviously to provide public goods and set the regulatory framework essentially through its three basic functions of regulation, taxation, and legislation. Civil society, which is by no means a homogeneous entity, can still be envisaged almost as the conscience of society and can perform the activist role that no other section of the state can. So what should be the role of the private sector? What should be the role of business, which by definition, under the kind of societal arrangements in which we live, has to be concerned with the efficient production of goods and services? It has the fundamental and moral responsibility to be profitable, even in the face of discharging its corporate social responsibility, or should we say now, while seeking shared value. In the case of businesses that most of you represent, the fundamental role is the production of medicines and technologies. And indeed, there's good evidence of your predilection for addressing the chronic diseases market. 3 years ago, I had the opportunity, or should I say misfortune, to chair a WHO expert working group on research and development coordination and financing. And while there was some controversy about some of our recommendations, some of the data on the distribution of R&D for NCDs was of interest. And one section of our report said, while the results are tentative and the relative share of research and development funding by diseases cannot be generalized, they showed a consistent 2-to-1 ratio in R&D funding allocated to NCDs as opposed to communicable diseases. And of all the projects in development in 2008, by the 10 pharmaceutical industries with the highest revenue, 84% of these were related to NCDs. I know that innovation in the production and treatments and technologies is a major theme of your conference, and there's little I can tell you experts about the mechanics of innovation or the requirements to transform inventions into innovations. I'm sure all of you are well aware of the fundamental difference between an invention and an innovation. But there are two dimensions that have interested me recently. The innovations we need for the management of the global health challenges are not only in the realm of the traditional technologies. We also need innovations in terms of the processes to address, for example, the chronic care of individuals. Chronic continuous care will assume ever greater importance because of our aging population and because of the increasing prevalence of the NCDs, which I mentioned above. And the latter is an example of the urgent need for a rethink of the processes that are necessary in many of our developing countries. Studies supported by you, IFPMA, have shown that the major problem for the secondary prevention of NCDs is not the price of first-line drugs, most of which, except for cancer drugs, are off patent, and therefore price is not the barrier to wide coverage with these drugs. The essential problem is one of access, and there is urgent need for the systems and processes that can assure access to these drugs where they are needed. I find it difficult to accept the simplistic view that corruption is the main problem, the main reason. There's a need for a more systematic examination of the problem of access and devising innovative country-specific processes to overcome them. And I believe that this could be one of the roles of this industry. So let me challenge you to find the kind of processes for enhancing access that will be innovative in the sense that they will constitute both an economic and a social value proposition for us. That the processes to be devised will be such that they will contribute both an economic as well as a social value proposition. But my interest stems from another one of my responsibilities. I am Chancellor of the University of the West Indies and have been concerned that the progress of our small countries, which with one exception cannot count on profitable extractive industry, will depend on knowledge work. And essential to this is the need for innovation. And at our recent graduation, I spoke at some length about academia and entrepreneurship and innovation. And I've been taken by the thesis of Ecovitz that there's a triple helix of innovation with the three strands being government, business, and academia. Government supplies a regulatory framework. The ideas, interventions come from academia, which is well suited because of the flow through of bright students and the presence of inquiring faculty to produce the ideas that then can be the basis of innovation. It is business that supplies the entrepreneurship and the venture capital that brings these products to the market as innovations. The quote from Ecovitz, I quote him, "The university is a generative principle of knowledge-based societies, just as government and industry were the primary institutions in industrial society. Industry remains a key actor as the locus of production. Government as a source of contractual relations that guarantee stable interactions and exchange. The competitive advantage of the university over the other knowledge-producing institutions is its students. Their regular entry and graduation continually bring in new ideas, in contrast to the research and development units of firms and government laboratories." I know you will not like this, but Ecovitz says that your laboratories tend to ossify, lacking the flow through of human capital that is built into the university. I know you won't like that. This interests us from the developing world, and I do not see this interaction between business, certainly not the pharmaceutical business, the university, and government in fomenting innovation in my part of the world. It's a challenge I would extend to you, that you explore how the academy from the developing world can join with you and government for the innovation both of processes and technologies that are applicable to the coming challenges of health. I will admit that it's not a universal view. There'll be those who prefer the view of Cardinal Newman that the university stick to its pristine roles of teaching and research, and that this new approach runs the risk of prostituting the search for knowledge that is essentially of instrumental value. Dr. Soni, I hope I have discharged my brief, and I hope I've outlined some of the challenges as I see them, and I hope that you accept some opportunities for addressing them, and I hope you accept that some of the opportunities lie in the areas of entrepreneurship and innovation. I wish your conference well, and I'm comforted by the attention you are giving to innovation for the improvement of health. And given that health is the asset most valued by human beings all over the world, and its centrality to human development brooks no debate, there can be few more noble ventures. In Paul Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, there's a very important character, one of my favorite characters, called Mr. Valiant for Truth. And Mr. Valiant for Truth at one stage said, and I will end with this, because I had great difficulty in getting my flight here. Mr. Valiant for Truth said, "Though with great difficulty I have got hither, I do not repent me of the trouble I have been at to arrive. Thank you.